The Bob Graham round and other stories, that's a bit of embellishment. But who has heard of the Bob Graham round or Bob Graham? No, okay, excellent. Who's done a Bob Graham or the Bob Graham? I was about to leave at that point. That happened to me when I gave this talk at the Catalyst Club, and I think someone in the audience after I gave this talk turned out that their brother had just done it that summer. And I, as you'll see in a minute, am yet to do this thing, which, so those of you who didn't put your hands up are thinking, well, what is this thing that you're going to do? Well, I will tell you. So, there he is, that's in the middle, if you can see. That's Bob Graham. That's about 1930. Bob was born in 1889 in Keswick, in the Lake District. And he worked in Keswick, in the Lake District, as a gardener. And then later on in life, about this time, he owned a guest house, which is still there, by Derwentwater. So that's Bob. Now he was, back in the early 1900s, he was what would be called really a walker. That's how he was known. But really, walkers then were runners, as we would call them now. And he walked far, and he walked high, and he walked fast. So he was essentially a runner. And this particular building, I don't think we recognise that. You might do. It's in Keswick, yeah, in Jim. So this is in Keswick, which is in the Lake District, pretty town on Derwentwater, and that is the town hall. It's called the Moot Hall. And on the 13th of June, 1932, Bob, who was then about 40, I think just turned 40, well, I won't do the maths, 41, 42, 42, possibly. He touched the Moot Hall 1 o'clock in the morning on 13th of June and set off around the Lake District and traversed 42 of the highest peaks, a distance of 66 miles and an ascent of 27,000 feet. And he came back to the Moot Hall, touched the door, 23:39 the following day. So he did it in 21 minutes under 24 hours. And that's a thing, is it? Well, it turns out that it is a bit of a thing, or it has become a bit of a thing. But, because this was back in 1932, so when Bob did it, he didn't do it in the sort of kit that we would now wear. He wasn't wearing kind of lycra and having all sorts of fancy hydration systems fueled by the Cis energy bars and stuff. He did it, as you saw in those clothes, the clothes that he was wearing back, I'll go back to there, it's essentially his pyjamas. So that's basically what he would wear most of the day. And the shoes he wore were plimsolls. And the fuel that he had for most of the round was pickled eggs, predominantly pickled eggs. So and other stuff, but mainly pickled eggs. And he did this thing, which is, as hopefully you'll see in a minute, it's quite an achievement. And why did he do it? What's significant? I mean, in a way, it's pointless. His achievement is pointless. But then, in a way, you can argue that most of what we set out to do in life could be described as somewhat pointless. But it was fun, and he did it. In the words of I think it was Edmund Hillary, he did it because it was there. He did it because it had become a bit of a thing, a bit of a challenge. And the history to this round, I mean, this is the recorded history. Goes back to this chap here, sitting on the near left, Dr. Arthur Wakefield. This picture was from one of the Everest expeditions with George Mallory, that some of you may have heard of. And I'm not sure of the year, this one could be 19 or 21. But anyway, Dr. Wakefield was on some of the Mallory expeditions. But he was a Keswick GP. And in 1905, so some 25 plus years before Bob did his round, Dr. Wakefield set out on another round from the Moot Hall at, I think it was midnight in, I think, August. He set out on his round and he did 48 miles, 23 tops, 23,500 feet, and then he got back to the Moot Hall in about 22 odd hours. So he, at that point, had gone the furthest within this 24-hour period, and that was back in 1905. And what he had done the year before is he established this rule for these, what he called long walks. And it's Wakefield's rule, and it's still a thing, which is to ascend the greatest possible number of peaks over 2,000 feet and to return to the starting point within 24 hours. So that became a bit of a thing in the lakes that people would aspire to do. And Dr. Wakefield was able to do it because he was a doctor. He was on some of the Maori expeditions. So he did come from what you had to be at that time to have the time in your hands to do these things. It was a reasonably moneyed family. And we'll see in a minute that that was not Bob's fortune. As you know, he was a gardener and then ended up at the lake house, but a guest house. But he was not someone who had the sort of wealth and backing that, say, Dr. Wakefield had, and also Mallory and the likes in terms of their expeditions. But he established this rule, and he kept on trying to push the distance and push the time period. But he wasn't the first. And going back to the first recording, because I'm sure this is gone in history, the first, as far as we know, was that's obviously not the individual, but that was the mountain that he started out from, because that's I don't know if you know, but that's Wasdale Head, and that's where the first recorded round started. And the chap that did that was a Reverend Elliot, who came down from Cambridge in 1864 in order to have a go at what was then one of these rounds. And he, from Wasdale Head, took in 9 tops. So it would be from there, you'd probably take in Great Gable and Scarfell Pike, etc. So he did 9. He did, took him 8.5 hours for him to get back to his starting point. And that was back in 1864. So you can see how this idea of the round started to grow and get some traction. And there have been other attempts. There was an attempt in 1920 by a guy called Eustace Thomas, who was coached by Dr. Wakefield. So Dr. Wakefield, having set the time record in 1905, he then coached Eustace Thomas to beat it, and Eustace Thomas did beat it. He did it, that round that Dr. Wakefield did, he did it in 21 hours and 25 minutes, so he took it down by an hour. And he was 53 years old when he did it. And what's quite nice about that is I like the fact that someone who held the record then helped a contender to then take on the next, to push it further. And that's what he did. I think Eustace Thomas had another crack at it a couple of years later. He added on a couple more tops, a couple more peaks, but he went over the 24-hour limit, so it doesn't count. Anyway, let's go back to Bob, because if we remember, 1932 was when he set out on his magnificent round. And just very quickly, the route he took, for those of you, I'm taking you all know the Lake District loosely, you've all maybe visited. How many of you visited the lakes? No, I thought so. Yeah, okay, fab. So you'll recognise some of these pictures. That's a view over Derwentwater up to Skidder. And that's the first top on the Bob Graham round that you take, and you go over the back of Skidder. That's known as leg 1. And each leg, or 5 legs, is about 10 to 12 miles in distance. That is the Helvellyn Ridge, effectively. We're up on the Dodds. And that's leg 2. We move here. This is Scarfell and Scarfells and Scarfell Pike. And that's leg 3. And these legs, they're kind of notional legs. It's purely because there's sort of 4 roads that cut through the lakes. And each leg, if you like, doesn't finish at the road, but you cross the road to carry on. So they kind of form a natural break for people to stuff pickled eggs or energy gels or whatever it is they take these days. So that's Scarfell. And then this final, that's back towards Wastwater, but that's obviously Great Gable. And that comes in on the 4th leg. when you then drop down into Honister, and you complete this marvellous round of 42 of the highest Lakeland tops, and that total distance of 27,000 feet, which is essentially the height of Everest in a 24-hour period, constantly moving forward. So Bob did it, and he got it down to under 24 hours when he did it, and it was a marvellous achievement. But he was, as I mentioned, Bob was a working man, and at the time, people that could go out and do these things were from the more moneyed and established classes. So people at the time didn't really believe or trust that he had done this. So there was a little bit of non-acceptance of this feat around the time, but eventually things settled down, and it was established as an achievement that was that he had done. And then it was largely forgotten about, because the next thing, of course, that happened chronologically was we entered the war, and so people didn't really do much of this stuff. But we came out of the war, and you've got this gaggle of people who, in their day, were stunningly good athletes and all supreme fell runners. And a couple of them, I forget their names now. In there, you've got the Heaton brothers, Alan and Ken Heaton. They were members of a famous fell running club called Clayton Lemore's. Hello.
I was just wondering which one was Peck's.
That's coming.
Okay.
I've got a picture, and yours is coming too, Ross. So these guys were supreme athletes of their day, and they were fell runners, members of, as I said, Clayton Lemore's, which is one of the top fell running clubs. In 1960, an article appeared in, I forget the name of the paper, and someone had just undertaken the Le Jog. They'd walked from Land's End to John O'Groats, and they had hailed it as quite an achievement. And a chap at the time called, I think, Dr. Griffin, responded to the article in the paper and said, "That's nothing. To walk from Land's End to John O'Groats, and however long you want to do it, is nothing. Try running the 42 peaks in the Lake District, 66 miles in under 24 hours. Now that's something." And that was in 1960. And still by then only one person had done it, and that was Bob Graham. And then along came this gaggle of people, and they saw the article, one of them had, and they thought, well, let's have a go at this. And Alan Heaton, it was, on the 25th of June 1960, decided to take it on with his brother Ken. And Ken, unfortunately, broke his glasses on the first leg as they were crossing a stream, so he had to pull out. But Alan did it, and he did it in 22 hours and 18 minutes. So we then, in 1960, had two people that had gone under this amazing 24-hour deadline. By 1970, we had a couple more. We had his brother did it, and a couple of other guys that were also in that picture. And they were all in their 40s and 50s in terms of their age range when they did it, but they all did it. So by 1970, we had four essentially elite athletes who weren't interested in sort of track or road running. They were interested in fell running, and they had all done this. And then along comes this guy who's called, his name is Fred Rogerson. He died a few years ago. He has not done it, but he was in so much admiration as a Lakeland dweller for the achievements of these runners that he suggested in 1971, I think, that they should set up a club. And of course it should be called the Bob Graham Club. And they decided that the rule of entry to that club would be very simple. You just had to do what Bob did. So it was open to anybody. And if you did it, you would get a certificate. And you could go, eventually over the years, I think they meet currently in the Chap Hotel for dinner once a year. And they give you a certificate if you get into the club. And so at this point there were four. That number is now, in the last, I'd say the last decade, it started to skyrocket. So it's up now above 2,000. I don't know, it may be pushing 2.5. But that is a recent phenomenon because nothing much happened in terms of that membership. It was a very, very slow progression because it is an awesome challenge. And of course it wasn't much known about. But this was the entry requirement: to start at the Moot Hall, as Bob did, and as others before him, traverse the 42 summits of the round, on foot, return to the starting point within 24 hours of starting time, being witnessed on each summit. So very similar to Wakefield's rule, but had some defined aspects in order to get entry into the club. You had to be witnessed. So you have to be paced, and you'll have a series of paces that will do legs with you and then drop out. So you have to plan your challenge, and that's the entry requirement. So just a little bit of quick facts about some of the members of the club, and so you can see some of the staggering achievements. This chap here, Billy Bland, in 1982, he did the round in 13 hours and 53 minutes, which is insane and has never been beaten to this day. So that record in 1982 still stands. And he did that. Oh, I'll come to that in a minute. We'll come back to Billy because he's a bit of a sporting legend, and yet none of us will really know of him because he never went to the Olympics. He never did any of that stuff. But he was an awesome athlete, as all these people that have done this are. The first woman to go round was in 1977, Jean Dawes. She did it in 23 hours and 37 minutes, so just under. But that record has come down, plummeted by Jasmine Paris about a year ago, and she did it in 15 hours and 24 minutes, so which is a staggeringly quick time. She's now the 6th fastest person to do the Bob Graham. That's Jasmine Paris. The oldest person is a guy called Brian Leathy. He did it when he was 66. The youngest person, a guy called Ben Scribb, who did it possibly a bit too young when he was 13. I don't know, that's going to really set him up for the rest of his life. But 23 hours and 51 minutes. Dogs have done it. That's not my dog, but 11 dogs have done it. Gives you a clue as to the type of breed that does do it, and that's mainly Border Collies. So 11 dogs, I think, so far have done it. Remarkably, some people have decided that doing it once isn't enough. So what they do is the Bob Graham double. I don't know what that gives them because they have entry to the club anyway and they get a certificate. So, but they go around twice. And that was first done in 1979 by a guy called Roger Baumeister, who did it in 46 hours and 34 minutes. So he gets to the moot hall, turns around and comes back, which is a bit nuts. But Nikki Spinks, who some of you might have heard of, she's a very well-known and superb fell runner. She broke his record about a year ago this month actually. She did it in 45 hours and 30 minutes. So she did it twice, which is literally insane. That's her, that's Nikki. Billy Bland, when he did his superhuman 13-hour, 53-minute round, which has never been beaten, he was 34 years old. He didn't have, as I mentioned, he didn't use our current sort of science-based energy, nutrition supplements, etc. He did it fueled mainly by Mars bars. And in fairness to Billy, he does live slap bang in the middle, so he would know the route particularly well, and that is obviously key. But to put his achievement in context, it's a record that has never been beaten. It probably will never be beaten. The 3 weeks after he did the Bob Graham round, which would be the sort of your rest and recovery process after doing something like that would be pretty lengthy. He did the Wasdale Head fell race, which is a notoriously hard fell race. It's an 18-mile fell race up around Wasdale Head. It is one of the hardest fell races to do. He did it 3 weeks after he did the Bob Graham in 3 hours and 25 minutes, which record has also never been beaten. And he also did something before he did the Bob Graham, and I've forgotten what that is, so I can't tell you. But he's pretty good, so that's and yet he's never translated. He wasn't interested in the Olympics or anything like that, so he stayed up in the fells, and that's what he loved. I don't know if I've got a picture. Yeah, Rob Jebb. He came close. I think it was either the summer just gone. He challenged for the record. He got it down to 14 hours 30 minutes, but that's still over half an hour outside Billy's time. But there have also been some notable failures, because many people see this challenge now and they get to hear of it and they think they want to give it a go. I am one of them. We'll come to that. But there have been some notable failures. Sir Ranulph Fiennes, for instance, he had a go at it. He failed. Chris Brasher, one of our fantastic figurehead, who recently passed away, I think, didn't he?
Yeah. Probably 12 or 18 months ago.
Yeah, he failed. Kilian Jornet, who's an amazing elite athlete, he didn't achieve it, but that may well have been he was training for something else. So that just leaves me, of course, to have a go at it. Which you're thinking, have I done it? And I've said already I haven't done it. I would like to do it. I have done some of the recceing to train to do it, which is key. You have to know the route. But one of the things that I thought I would do, it would be important to do if I was going to have a go at this thing, because going up to the lakes to have a go at the Bob Graham is, particularly if you're a soft southerner, is, can be seen as a little bit, you can sort of a long stretch. So I thought, well, I need to go and do maybe a fell race or two and become part of this this group. So that was me doing the in my Hailsham Harriers vest, doing the Scarfell Pike fell race a couple of years ago. When I think I said this before, but it's funny. I see that and I haven't seen that for a while. But a mate of mine said when I showed him that picture, he said, "Yeah, it's kind of a cross between Julie Andrews and Steve McQueen." I think he's kind of on the money with that, really. But yeah, I thought it was important that I had a go at that was a fantastic race. And the one thing that when I did that race, I remember thinking, not only am I a soft southerner, I've got to come up and do this. Actually, it's you don't see when you go to a fell race. How many have done fell races? I'm talking about doing a fell race, a fell run. Anybody? Roughs. Pickles, have you not done?
I've not done a fell race. No, I have been on Isle of Wight, haven't you?
Oh, okay. There is. Yeah, there are a couple of.
Have you ever done the Jack and Jill?
Yes, I have.
Yeah.
Yeah. There are a couple of fell races in the south, even though we don't have the mountains. But the one thing you will see if you ever do a fell race, one thing you won't see is people dressed up as pantomime horses or other stuff. There isn't any of that. They take it very seriously, but in a nice way. The other thing that I noticed is that my accent does slightly stand out a little bit as you're talking to the other competitors, and it's only sort of so many times that I can say to someone if they're talking to me, "I'm terribly sorry. What did you say?" Which I have to stop doing and just nod and agree that I understand. But it's a lovely thing. The whole fell running community, leaving aside the Bob Graham, is a wonderful community to sort of be part of and to have a go at. Plus the fact that, Peckles, you mentioned that book, Feet in the Clouds, by Richard Asquith, which is a book about his journey to do. He's a journalist, and it was a book about his journey to do the Bob Graham in his midlife, and he had about 4 attempts before he achieved it. But one of the things he talks about, one of the things that I love, is when you do these fell races, the thing that kind of draws you to them is, as much as the distance and the mountains and the majesty of the scenery, are the names of the ridiculous things. Things like the Hayworth Hobble and Up the Nab and all this stuff. It's steeped in history, and you feel part of that when you do these races. It's not at all important the position that you achieve when you do the race. It's just being part of that fabric and being part of that community that does these crazy things pretty much every day of the week throughout most of the year, really. So that's my dog, by the way, which is I'm ending now, so I thought I'd end with a picture of my dog. If I'd lost you, everybody likes a dog, so but I do plan to have a go. I had been planning to have a go at it this year. I probably will defer that. I'm back up to the lakes next month for a bit more recceing. I don't yet know the full route inside out, but when I do it, she doesn't know it yet, but she'll be doing it with me. And she'll probably do about 3 times the distance, of course, being a dog. But I will just finish with one thing that I learnt recently. There's a pub that I go to in the Scarfell area called the Woolpack Inn. And it's a lovely pub, they're dog friendly, and it's very well positioned for me to recce the route. I found in their pub that the landlord showed me an old book that they have, and it's all handwritten, goes back to the early 1900s, and in that book they talk about the Woolpack Walk, And of course, all these things, as I mentioned, they started as long walks or walks, and they've become known as rounds. And this Woolpack Walk is an 18.75 mile, 10 top, 7,000 foot walk, which if you do, you get back to the pub and they give you a free pint. Frankly, they should give you a lie down and a hot meal, but they give you a free pint. Anyway, the first time the first recorded attempt at the Woolpack Walk was in 1929, so it predates the Bob Graham. And then looking at all the entries since, it's fascinating to see that this walk, in inverted commas, it was, I think the pub had said that if you could do it in under 12 hours, you get this free pint. But then you see what's happened over the years is that people look, they fill in the sheet and they sign their names, they did it in 11 hours and 53 minutes. And of course what happens is someone who's going to have a go at it thinks, well, we can beat that. And you see these times coming down and down and down. The record currently stands at 4 hours, set in 1976. Now, I've had a go at that Woolpack Walk, and 4 hours you're not walking 1 foot to do that round in 4 hours. You are running flat out, frankly. That's an astounding time. So there we are. That is the Bob Crown round. Hopefully you'll all be inspired to go out and start fell running and do it. So I'll take a few questions if there are any, or we can just go straight downstairs and have another drink and come back for our final speaker. Yes, Fiona.
What I want to know is, are you going to have the pickled eggs?
And the pyjamas.
And the pyjamas
And
when
the
you do it?
pigtails.
Well, actually, that is a very good point, isn't it? You should be. It's not authentic, is it? If you don't do it, and you do it in all
Pickled
this
eggs.
pickled eggs. So at least a Mars bar, yeah, and pyjamas, because
Oh, sounds better.
I don't actually wear pyjamas, so that's another. Well, actually, I think that the whole thing. I was caught up in that in the talk we had a couple of months ago by the naturist, didn't we? That here, yeah, and in fact, I mentioned that he did it in his pyjamas, and this is true. A lot of fell running was done largely naked in the early days. They didn't really mind what garments they were; it didn't matter. So I'll leave that to the thought of you. See grown men running up and down mountains. Just naked. So yes, sorry, yeah.
Just for information, there's no way in this lifetime I'm running something like that. But is there a Wainwright walk or something like it that covers the same route?
Well, do you know, that's interesting. I would imagine. I mean, well, to be honest, what you could do is some people just walk it. They walk the Bob Graham round and they camp and they stay overnight. So they might take 3 or 4 or 5 days, 5 or 6 months. I've got friends who go up and they do chunks of it on an excursion to the lakes every time they go up. So and the route, I had great fun in the early days when I was recceing. Everything was sort of on these kind of obscure websites, and I'd read it and then I'd write down notes, get to the gate and follow the stream to the third rock, and of course some buggers move the rock, so and I would make these notes and I'd start and I'd go up and that was part of the fun until someone told me that well, Tim, have you seen that there's a map? What? They've got what? And there's a Bob Graham Harvey map, and it's fantastic, but it's taken all the fun out of it because it's all there, it's all marked. But you can't mark the route, so the route has to remain. One of the rules is there can be no way markers, nothing leave. And if people leave kind of pointers on the ground, it's a real no-no. It's a terrible. You'd never be in the Bob Graham Club if you did that. If you left some sort of. I saw some footage the other day that someone had been putting some markers over Barrow, which is quite, sort of navigationally quite difficult, and they had got into trouble with the club for doing that. But yeah. Any other? Yes. Yeah.
So a really boring question, but you said earlier on there's a question mark over whether Bob Graham had actually done it.
Right.
And one of the key criteria is witness. So in this day and age, how is it witnessed that you've actually done all
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, Bob had pacers with him, and so that in the end they did accept his account. And the pacers, they tend to do about 10 to 12 miles each, and then they drop out. So you plan your paces in advance, and you meet them at various pickup points, etc. So now the same system happens. Everybody, if you're planning your Bob Graham, you'll have a team in place. You'll have probably a minimum of 5 pacers they'll carry your kit, so you'll run light, and they'll drop in and drop out as they need to. But there have been plenty of attempts where the challenger starts off at the Moot Hall and the first pacer is with him, and the challenger drops out, but the pacer continues, and the pacer continues round. But it's only a valid entry if it is witnessed, and that has to be by an individual. So a lot of the runs are done with Garmin's these days, so the tracking devices, and you can get a trace and you can have that, but that's not accepted. It has to be a verifiable another human being that confirms you were on the top of Fairfield at whatever time of day or night, and you got back okay. And yes, Jenna.
So when they now, presumably, it's running through the night.
Yes.
So did they do it in the dark without?
They would have done, yeah. By the light of the moon, one hopes. Well, their navigation and their knowledge of the fells is phenomenal. There's a famous fell runner. Do you know Joss Naylor?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, who had the record for running the most tops within a 24-hour period, which was 76. I think it's currently 77. So it's not quite the Bob Graham round. It's harder than that, but he just it's not a particular circuit. But you just run as many tops as you can. And the night or the day and night that he did it was the worst weather that had been seen in that particular decade. It was in the 70s, I think. And people wouldn't go out. And when they knew that he had taken on this challenge, and he did it in conditions that you would not have gone out into the lakes with. So yeah, I don't know, the light of the moon, torches. They didn't have phones, but now of course everyone has these incredibly powerful head torches, which you're noticing. So it's superb. Yes, sorry, Peckles.
So Bob did it on pickled eggs.
He did.
What are you going to do?
Yeah, I haven't. I mean, yes, it's a good question. Well, the thing with the kind of plastic food, the kind of the cis food that athletes use these days is that I don't know if you've tried any endurance events, but when you're doing endurance events, you have to fuel to keep going. Our bodies are like a kind of an engine, so we have to do that. But there's only you begin to get sick of taking on that plastic food. So to vary the nutrition is quite important, and I think just kind of eating stuff that you like is quite good. So I'm imagining I'd get back to the van or car at the particular leg and just have a steak and chips and something. Well, I think no, but Nikki Spinks did hers, and she had her passion, I think, was for chicken curry and chips, and so at various points she would have a kind of bowl full of chicken curry and chips, and then she'd go again. Kind of like the pickled eggs. Yeah, slightly risky. Yes, yes.
The Mars diet strikes me as kind of sponsored. So that part. How high are the tops? And do they include Munros and Marilyn's?
Well, they do in the sense that obviously Munro is over 3,000 feet. So in the Bob Graham round, you'll cover Scafell, Skidder, Scafell Pike, Scafell, Skidder, and Helvellyn, all of which are over 3,000 feet. So they do all classify as Munros, and then the rest of them are generally over about 2,000 feet. In fact, that is part of the requirement. The top has to be over 2,000 foot. So they are pretty high, and they are where our tallest sort of biggest mountains are, I guess, aren't they? Yeah. Right. Okay. There's no more questions. I'm going to stop us there because that's perfect timing. We can have a break, have another drink, and come back, and we'll start at 10 o'clock for an Uja Kapivi, possibly. And our final speakers are going to talk to us about no regrets. So thank you very much, and see you in 15 minutes.